The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Sterling mansion as Maria hurried through her daily cleaning routine. At 34, she had been working as a housekeeper for wealthy families in Beverly Hills for over 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for the challenges she now faced in the home of tech billionaire Jonathan Sterling. Maria moved quietly through the sprawling estate, her worn sneakers making barely a sound on the expensive Italian tiles. She had learned long ago that the best housekeepers were invisible, present when needed but never intrusive. Today felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that made her stomach churn with worry. The Sterling family had been her employers for 3 years now. Jonathan Sterling, the 42-year-old founder of Sterling Tech, was known for his innovative software solutions that had revolutionized how companies managed their data. His success story was the stuff of legends, a college dropout who built a billion-dollar empire from his garage. But Maria knew him differently. She saw him in his private moments, witnessed his struggles with insomnia, observed how he paced the halls at 3 in the morning when business deals went wrong. Mrs. Sterling, his wife of 15 years, was a former Broadway actress who now dedicated her time to various charitable causes. She was kind to Maria, always remembering to ask about her family back in El Salvador. Their 2 children, 16-year-old Emma and 14-year-old Michael, were typical teenagers, sometimes moody, sometimes sweet, but generally respectful of the staff. As Maria dusted the family portraits in the main hallway, she noticed something troubling. Mr. Sterling's home office door was slightly ajar, and she could hear raised voices coming from within. This was unusual because he typically conducted his business calls from his downtown office. She paused, not wanting to eavesdrop, but unable to ignore the distress in the voices. Through the crack in the door, she could see Mr. Sterling packing frantically, his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled. He was on the phone, and his face was pale with worry. Maria had seen this look before. It was the same expression he wore during the company's near-bankruptcy crisis 2 years ago. "I don't care what it takes," she heard him say into the phone. "Find another way. We cannot let this information go public. Too many people depend on us." Maria quickly moved away, not wanting to be caught listening. But as she continued her work in the adjacent dining room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was happening. The Sterling family had always been good to her, paying her fairly and treating her with respect, a rarity in her line of work. Around noon, Mrs. Sterling approached her in the kitchen where Maria was preparing lunch for the family. Her usual bright demeanor was replaced by visible anxiety. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Maria," said softly, glancing around to make sure they were alone, "I need to talk to you about something important." Maria stopped chopping vegetables and turned to face her employer. In her years of domestic work, she had learned to read the subtle signs of distress in the families she served. Her red-rimmed eyes and the way she kept wringing her hands told Maria that whatever was happening was serious. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling, how can I help you?" Took a deep breath before continuing. "There might be some changes coming to our household, some difficult times ahead. I want you to know that whatever happens, Jonathan and I value everything you've done for our family." Maria felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. In her experience, conversations like this usually ended with job loss. She thought about her own family, her elderly mother in San Salvador who depended on the money Maria sent home every month, her younger brother Carlos who was trying to finish college, and her own 8-year-old daughter Sophia who lived with Maria's sister while Maria worked long hours to provide for them all. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Sterling?" Maria asked carefully. Hesitated, seeming to weigh her words. "There are some business complications, legal issues. I can't go into details, but there's a possibility that we might have to make some adjustments to our lifestyle." Before Maria could respond, the sound of screeching tires in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the kitchen window, they could see a black sedan pulling up to the front entrance. 3 men in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their serious expressions and purposeful strides suggesting this was not a social visit. His face went white. "They're here," she whispered, more to herself than to Maria. The doorbell rang, its melodious chime now sounding ominous in the tense atmosphere. Straightened her shoulders, trying to compose herself. "Maria, could you please answer that? And then, perhaps it would be best if you took the rest of the day off." But as Maria walked toward the front door, she could hear on the phone in the kitchen her voice urgent and frightened. Jonathan, they're here. The FBI agents. They're at the house. Maria's hand froze on the door handle. FBI agents? Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. She had heard whispers among the other domestic workers in the neighborhood about wealthy families facing investigations, tax evasion, fraud, insider trading. But the Sterlings had always seemed different, more ethical than some of their neighbors. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Maria opened the door to find three stern-faced agents, one of whom stepped forward and showed his badge. "Good afternoon. I'm agent with the FBI. We're here to speak with Jonathan Sterling regarding an ongoing investigation. Is he available?" The irony of the agent sharing her last name wasn't lost on Maria, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "He's not home at the moment, but Mrs. Sterling is here." "We'll speak with her then. May we come in?" Maria led them to the living room, her mind spinning. As she went to fetch, she could hear the agents speaking in low tones among themselves. Words like fraud, embezzlement, and federal charges drifted to her ears. Appeared in the living room looking composed despite her obvious distress. She had changed into a more formal outfit and applied fresh makeup, but Maria could see her hands shaking as she greeted the agents. "Good afternoon, I'm Sterling. How can I help you?" The lead agent, a middle-aged man with graying temples, spoke in a professional but firm tone. "Mrs. Sterling, we have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an investigation into Sterling Tech's financial practices. We also need to speak with your husband." His composure cracked slightly. "A warrant? I don't understand. There must be some mistake." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to call your husband and ask him to return home immediately. We also need access to his home office and any computers or documents related to his business." As the agents began their search, retreated to the kitchen where Maria was waiting. The older woman's mask of composure finally fell away completely, and she broke down in tears. "Maria, I don't know what to do," sobbed. "They're saying Jonathan might have stolen money from his own company, that he used it for personal expenses. But I know my husband, he would never do something like that." Maria handed a tissue and gently guided her to sit down. In her years of working for wealthy families, she had seen many crises, affairs, business failures, family feuds. But this felt different. The FBI presence, the talk of federal charges, the systematic search of the house, this was serious criminal territory. "Mrs. Sterling," Maria said softly, "have you called a lawyer?" Nodded through her tears. "Jonathan's attorney is on his way, but Maria, if these charges are true, if Jonathan really did what they're saying, we could lose everything. The house, the cars, our savings, all of it could be seized by the government." The weight of words settled over Maria like a heavy blanket. If the Sterling family lost their wealth, they would certainly have to let go of their household staff. Maria would be out of a job, with no savings to fall back on and a family depending on her income. But as she watched struggle with her fear and confusion, Maria felt something deeper than concern for her own situation. She had worked for this family for 3 years, had seen them in their most private moments, had watched their children grow. Despite the vast difference in their circumstances, she had come to genuinely care about them. "What can I do to help?" Maria asked. Looked up at her with surprise. "Maria, you should probably start looking for another position. I can give you excellent references, and with your experience, you'll find something else quickly." But Maria shook her head. "Mrs. Sterling, your family has been good to me. If you're going through a difficult time, maybe that's when you need help the most." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming outside. Through the window, they could see Jonathan Sterling getting out of his Mercedes, his face grim as he took in the sight of the FBI vehicles in his driveway. His usual confident stride was replaced by the heavy steps of a man facing his worst nightmare. As Jonathan entered the house, Maria could hear him speaking with the agents in the living room. His voice was controlled but strained as he answered their questions about business transactions, company accounts, and financial records. The search continued for hours. Agents carried out boxes of documents, computer hard drives, and financial records. Neighbors began gathering across the street, drawn by the unusual activity at the normally quiet Sterling mansion. Maria knew that by evening, news of the FBI raid would be spreading throughout their exclusive Beverly Hills community. When the agents finally left, taking Jonathan with them for questioning at their field office, the house felt hollow and violated. sat in the living room surrounded by the mess left behind by the search, looking lost and alone. Maria approached her carefully. "Mrs. Sterling, the children will be home from school soon. Maybe we should clean up before they arrive." Looked around as if seeing the chaos for the first time. File cabinets had been emptied, drawers pulled out, cushions removed from sofas. The systematic nature of the search had left every room feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Yes," said quietly, "they shouldn't see it like this." Maria spent the rest of the afternoon helping restore order to the house. As they worked together, began to open up about her fears. The investigation had been ongoing for months, she revealed. Jonathan had been trying to handle it quietly, hoping it would resolve without affecting the family. He thought if he could just replace the money before anyone noticed, trailed off, then caught herself. "But I don't really know what happened. Jonathan has been so stressed, so secretive. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a stranger." As evening approached, Emma and Michael returned from school to find their mother and Maria in the kitchen, both looking exhausted. The teenagers immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked, noting his absence at dinner time. Struggled for words. How do you tell your children that their father might be a criminal, that everything they've known and taken for granted might disappear? "Your father is dealing with some business issues," she said carefully. "There might be some changes in our lives over the next few months." Michael, despite being younger, picked up on the gravity of the situation. "Are we in trouble? Are we going to lose the house?" The direct question hung in the air like a sword. Eyes filled with tears again, and Maria felt her heart break for this family that was facing the complete destruction of their life as they knew it. That night, after the family had gone to bed, Maria sat in her small bedroom in the staff quarters, staring at her phone. She had calls to make to her sister, to let her know she might need to find a new job soon, to her mother to prepare her for a possible reduction in the money Maria could send home. But as she looked out her window at the sprawling grounds of the Sterling estate, illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting, she found herself thinking not about her own uncertain future, but about the family sleeping in the main house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and possibly the beginning of the end of everything the Sterlings had built. Maria had seen wealthy families fall before, but never from this close. Never when she cared about the people involved. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she wondered what the morning would bring, and whether there was anything she could do to help the people who had become more than just employers to her. The investigation was just beginning, and Maria had no way of knowing that her own actions in the coming days would prove to be the key to either saving the Sterling family or watching them lose everything they held dear. Sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes a billionaire's fate rests in the hands of someone he had barely noticed before. 3 weeks had passed since the FBI raid, and the Sterling household had transformed into something unrecognizable. The once vibrant home now felt like a museum after closing time, quiet, empty, and filled with an underlying sense of dread that seemed to seep from the very walls. Jonathan Sterling had been released on bail, but the conditions were strict. His assets were frozen pending the investigation, his passport confiscated, and he was required to wear an ankle monitor that tracked his every movement. The man who once commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions was now confined to his own home, watching helplessly as his empire crumbled. Maria had made the decision to stay, even though had offered to help her find other employment. 3 other household staff members had already left, the gardener, the part-time cook, and the night security guard. They couldn't afford to work without pay, and with the family's accounts frozen, there was no money for salaries. But Maria remained. She used her own modest savings to buy groceries for the family, telling it was an advance on future wages. The truth was more complicated. She had grown to love this family, and she couldn't bear to abandon them in their darkest hour. The investigation had revealed devastating details. Jonathan was accused of embezzling nearly $15 million from Sterling Tech over a 5-year period. The money had allegedly been used to maintain their luxurious lifestyle, the Beverly Hills mansion, expensive cars, private school tuition, and lavish vacations. Federal prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had lived beyond his means and stolen from his own company to maintain appearances. Emma and Michael were struggling to understand how their father, their hero, could be capable of such crimes. The family's social circle had largely abandoned them. Former friends no longer returned calls, and the children faced whispers and stares at their exclusive private school. One morning, as Maria was cleaning Jonathan's study, she noticed him sitting at his desk, staring blankly at a stack of legal documents. He looked like he had aged a decade in 3 weeks. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated, his hair was unkempt, he hadn't shaved in days, and his expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame. "Mr. Sterling," Maria said softly, not wanting to startle him, "can I get you some breakfast?" Jonathan looked up at her with hollow eyes. It was perhaps the longest conversation they had ever had, despite her working in his house for 3 years. "Maria, right," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're still here." "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question seemed to come from a place of genuine confusion. "Everyone else has left. My business partners won't take my calls. My golf buddies act like I have a contagious disease. Even my brother thinks I'm guilty. So why are you still here?" Maria paused in her dusting, considering her words carefully. "Your family needs help, Mr. Sterling, and I believe in helping people when they're down." Jonathan let out a bitter laugh. "Help? Maria, I'm probably going to federal prison. They want to give me 20 years. 20 years for trying to give my family a good life." "Did you take the money, Mr. Sterling?" The question hung in the air between them. Jonathan had been asked this question dozens of times by lawyers, investigators, and family members, but something about Maria's direct, non-judgmental tone made him pause. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Most things are," Maria replied, continuing her cleaning. "But complicated doesn't mean hopeless." Over the following days, Maria found herself in increasingly lengthy conversations with Jonathan. Perhaps it was because she was one of the few people who still treated him with basic human dignity. Or maybe it was because she had no agenda, no money to lose, no social standing to protect. Whatever the reason, Jonathan began to open up to her about the pressures that had led to his downfall. The embezzlement charges, he explained, stemmed from a series of increasingly desperate financial decisions. Sterling Tech had been struggling for years, losing market share to larger competitors. To maintain investor confidence and keep the company afloat, Jonathan had begun borrowing money from various company accounts, always intending to pay it back once business improved. "I told myself it was temporary," he explained one afternoon as they sat in the garden. "Just until the next big contract came through, just until we launched the new software platform, just until the market turned around. But there was always another crisis, another reason why I couldn't pay it back yet." Maria listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions but never condemning. She had worked for enough wealthy families to understand the pressure to maintain appearances, the fear of losing status and respect. "The worst part," Jonathan continued, "is that I convinced myself I was doing it for them, and the kids. I didn't want them to worry about money. I didn't want to move them out of this house or take Emma out of her school or cancel Michael's piano lessons. I thought if I could just hold on long enough, everything would work out." "But it didn't work out," Maria observed gently. "No, it didn't, and now they're going to lose everything anyway, and it's my fault." That evening, Maria was helping sort through legal documents when she made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden in a stack of old tax returns, she found a folder marked Emergency Fund Personal. Inside were bank statements showing a separate account that contained nearly $2 million, money that hadn't been mentioned in any of the FBI documents or legal filings. "Mrs. Sterling," Maria said carefully, "do you know about this account?" Looked at the statements with confusion. "I've never seen this before. Jonathan handles all our finances. I sign papers when he asks me to, but I don't really understand the details." Maria studied the statements more carefully. The account had been opened 7 years ago, and deposits had been made regularly, but these weren't large sums. They were modest amounts, ranging from $5,000 to $20,000, deposited monthly over several years. The next morning, Maria approached Jonathan with the folder. His reaction was immediate and emotional. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his hands shaking as he looked through the statements. "In your study, mixed in with old tax documents. Mr. Sterling, this money, where did it come from?" Jonathan sat down heavily, the folder clutched in his hands. "This is my father's legacy, my real father's legacy." The story that emerged was one Maria had never heard before. Jonathan's biological father had been a Mexican immigrant who had worked multiple jobs to support his family. He had died in a construction accident when Jonathan was 15, leaving behind a small insurance policy and a strong work ethic that he had instilled in his son. "My mother 2 years later," Jonathan explained. "My stepfather adopted me, gave me his name, paid for my education. I took his name Sterling, and eventually I started thinking of myself as someone who had always been privileged. But my real father, he left me something more important than money. He left me principles that I forgot somewhere along the way." The emergency fund, Jonathan revealed, had been his attempt to reconnect with his roots. Every month, he had deposited money earned from his own salary, not company funds, but his legitimate earnings as CEO, into this separate account. The money was intended to create a scholarship fund for children of immigrant workers, in memory of his father. "I never told about it because I was embarrassed," he admitted. "I was embarrassed about my background, about my real father who died wearing a hard hat and work boots. I wanted everyone to think I was born into this world of privilege." Maria stared at the bank statements, her mind racing. "Mr. Sterling, this money, it's clean, right? It's your own salary." "Every penny. I have all the documentation." "Then this changes things. This proves you're not the person the prosecutors are painting you to be. This proves you have a conscience that you are trying to give back." But Jonathan shook his head sadly. "It doesn't change anything, Maria. I still took money from my company. I still lied to investors and employees. Having good intentions doesn't make me innocent." "Maybe not innocent," Maria said firmly, "but it makes you human, and humans deserve second chances." That afternoon, Maria did something that surprised even herself. She called the office of Jonathan's defense attorney, a prestigious law firm downtown. When the secretary tried to brush her off, Maria was persistent. "Tell Mr. that Maria has information about the Sterling case that could help his client. Tell him it's about money that the prosecutors don't know about, and tell him it's important." 2 hours later, Maria found herself in the downtown offices of Pierce and Associates, sitting across from James, one of Los Angeles' most respected defense attorneys. The office was intimidating floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive artwork on the walls, leather-bound legal books arranged with precision. A man in his 60s with silver hair and a sharp suit listened carefully as Maria explained her discovery. She had brought copies of the bank statements and a typed summary of what Jonathan had told her about the emergency fund. "Miss," said when she finished, "why are you doing this? What's your relationship to the Sterling family?" "I work for them, I clean their house." "And they're paying you to help with legal matters?" "No, sir, they're not paying me at all right now. Their money is frozen." Leaned back in his chair, studying Maria with new interest. "So you're helping them for free? Why?" Maria chose her words carefully. "Because they're good people who made bad choices, and because sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing to do." Was quiet for a long moment, processing both the information and the woman who had brought it to him. "Miss, what you've discovered here is significant. It doesn't absolve Mr. Sterling of the charges against him, but it provides important context about his character. It shows a pattern of charitable intent that contradicts the prosecution's narrative of simple greed." "Can it help him?" "It might, but I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared to testify about these conversations you've had with Mr. Sterling? Are you prepared to tell a court about what you've observed in that house?" Maria felt a flutter of nervousness. The idea of testifying in a federal court case was terrifying. But she thought about crying in the kitchen, about Emma and Michael trying to understand how their world had fallen apart, about Jonathan sitting alone in his study, drowning in guilt and shame. "Yes," she said, "I'll testify." Over the following weeks, Maria worked closely with legal team to prepare her testimony. They coached her on courtroom procedures, helped her organize her observations about the Sterling family, and prepared her for the aggressive questioning she might face from federal prosecutors. The case began to take on new dimensions as built his defense strategy around Maria's insights. Rather than simply denying the charges, they would acknowledge Jonathan's crimes while arguing for leniency based on his character, his circumstances, and his genuine remorse. Maria's role became central to this strategy. As someone who had observed the family intimately but had no financial stake in the outcome, her testimony would carry unique weight. She could speak to Jonathan's character, his relationship with his family, and his true intentions in ways that even couldn't. But as the trial date approached, Maria began to face pressure from unexpected sources. Other domestic workers in the neighborhood warned her about getting involved in her employer's legal troubles. Her own family expressed concern about her decision to testify, worried that it would make her unemployable in the future. Maria, her sister, called from El Salvador. "Why are you risking yourself for these rich people? They have lawyers and money. You have nothing to protect you." The question haunted Maria, but she knew her answer. She had seen enough wealthy families to know that money didn't automatically make people bad, just as poverty didn't automatically make people good. The Sterling family had treated her with dignity and respect, and when they needed help, she couldn't turn her back on them. The night before the trial was scheduled to begin, Maria sat in her room at the Sterling house, preparing her testimony one final time. Through her window, she could see the federal courthouse in downtown. Los Angeles buzzed with activity as the trial of Jonathan Sterling began. Media vans lined the street outside, and reporters jostled for position, eager to cover what had become known as the Silicon Valley embezzlement case. For the past 6 months, the story had captivated the public. A billionaire tech mogul accused of stealing from his own company to fund a lavish lifestyle. Maria sat in the witness waiting room, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her nerves. She wore her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she had bought for her daughter's graduation ceremony 2 years earlier. In a few hours, she would take the stand to testify in defense of the man who had employed her for 3 years. The prosecution had spent the first week of the trial methodically laying out their case. They presented bank records, expense reports, and testimony from Sterling Tech employees who had been laid off while Jonathan continued to live in luxury. The picture they painted was damning: a greedy executive who had systematically looted his own company while his employees lost their jobs and investors lost their money. Assistant U.S. Attorney was known for her ruthless prosecution style, and she had spared no detail in describing Jonathan's alleged crimes. She showed the jury photographs of the Sterling mansion, invoices for expensive cars, receipts for luxury vacations, all funded, she claimed, with stolen money. "Ladies and of the jury," had said in her opening statement, "this case is about greed, pure and simple. The defendant had everything: a successful company, a loving family, more money than most people could spend in a lifetime. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more, and he was willing to steal to get it." Jonathan's defense attorney, James, had countered with a different narrative. Yes, his client had made serious mistakes, but they weren't born of greed. They were the desperate actions of a man trying to save his failing company and protect his employees' jobs. Promised to show the jury the real Jonathan Sterling, not the caricature painted by the prosecution, but a complex human being who had lost his way but still retained his fundamental decency. As the trial progressed, Maria watched from the gallery as Jonathan sat at the defense table, his transformation over the past months evident to anyone who looked closely. The confident, commanding presence he had once projected was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to have aged years in just a few months. He listened intently to every word of testimony, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just sitting quietly as his life was dissected in public. Sterling attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row behind the defense table. Emma and Michael, now 17 and 15, came when their school schedule allowed. The family that had once been the picture of success and happiness now looked fragile and uncertain, united only by their love for each other and their hope that somehow justice would prevail. The prosecution's case was methodical and thorough. They called witnesses from Sterling Tech who about the company's financial struggles and the layoffs that had resulted from Jonathan's alleged embezzlement. They presented expert testimony about corporate financial controls and how Jonathan had circumvented them. They showed the jury a spreadsheet detailing every dollar that had allegedly been stolen and how it had been spent. But as the prosecution rested their case, Maria could see that was ready to fight back. The defense's strategy was risky. They wouldn't deny that Jonathan had taken money from the company, but they would argue that his actions, while wrong, didn't deserve the harsh punishment the government was seeking. His opening witness was Dr. Robert, a psychologist who specialized in executive stress and decision-making under pressure. Doctor about the enormous pressures facing CEOs of struggling companies and how these pressures could lead to poor judgment and desperate decisions. Next came character witnesses, employees of Sterling Tech who about Jonathan's leadership style and his genuine concern for his workers. They described a CEO who had taken pay cuts to avoid layoffs, who had worked 18-hour days trying to save the company, who had personally helped employees facing financial hardships. Then called Sterling to the stand. His testimony was emotional and powerful. She described a husband who had become increasingly withdrawn and stressed as the company struggled, but who had never stopped loving his family or trying to provide for them. She acknowledged that she had been largely uninvolved in their finances, a fact that the prosecution tried to use against her, suggesting that she had willfully ignored the source of their wealth. "My husband has many faults," said, tears streaming down her face, "but greed isn't one of them. He gave away more money than most people ever make. He helped countless families, funded scholarships, supported charities. If he took money from his company, it wasn't because he was selfish, it was because he was desperate." But it was when called Maria to the stand that the courtroom atmosphere truly changed. Maria walked slowly to the witness stand, acutely aware of every eye in the room watching her. She had never been in a federal courtroom before, had never been sworn in as a witness, had never faced the scrutiny of lawyers, judges, and jury members whose job it was to determine the truth. Began with gentle questions, establishing Maria's background and her relationship to the Sterling family. She described her work as a housekeeper, her observations of the family over 3 years, and her decision to stay with them even when they could no longer pay her. "Miss," said, "during the time you worked for the Sterling family, did you have opportunities to observe Mr. Sterling's character and behavior?" "Yes, sir. I saw him every day in good times and bad times." "Can you describe what you observed?" Maria took a deep breath and began to share what she had witnessed. She talked about seeing Jonathan working late into the night, about his obvious love for his family, about his stress and worry as the company struggled. She described finding him once at 3 in the morning, sitting in his study with his head in his hands, surrounded by financial documents. "He wasn't counting money or planning expensive purchases," Maria said. "He was trying to figure out how to save people's jobs." Then introduced the emergency fund documents that Maria had discovered. As Maria explained how she had found them and what Jonathan had told her about their purpose, she could see several jury members leaning forward with interest. "Miss, when Mr. Sterling told you about this emergency fund, did he seem proud of it?" "No, sir. He seemed ashamed. He was embarrassed about his background, about his real father who was an immigrant worker. But he wanted to honor his father's memory by helping other people like him." The prosecution's cross-examination was aggressive, as Maria had expected. Assistant U.S. Attorney tried to portray Maria as a biased witness who was simply trying to protect her employers. She questioned Maria's education, her understanding of financial matters, and her motivations for testifying. "Miss," said sharply, "isn't it true that you're testifying for the defendant because you hope to keep your job?" "No, ma'am. Mr. Sterling can't afford to pay me anymore, and he probably won't be able to for a long time, no matter what happens in this trial." "Then why are you here?" Maria looked directly at the prosecutor, then at the jury, and finally at Jonathan Sterling, who was watching her with an expression of gratitude and amazement. "Because I've worked for a lot of wealthy families, and most of them treated me like I was invisible, like I was just part of the furniture. But the Sterling family treated me like I was a human being. They asked about my family, they cared about my problems, they showed me respect. And when they needed help, I couldn't turn my back on them." "But miss, you're asking this jury to ignore the fact that the defendant stole millions of dollars from his company." "No, ma'am, I'm not asking them to ignore anything. I'm asking them to see the whole person, not just his mistakes. People are complicated. Good people sometimes do bad things when they're desperate or scared. That doesn't make the bad things okay, but it doesn't erase the good either." The courtroom was silent as Maria's words hung in the air, even seemed momentarily taken aback by the simple honesty of the response. His redirect examination was brief. He asked Maria one final question that would become the key moment of the entire trial. "Miss, in your opinion, having observed Mr. Sterling for 3 years, is he the kind of person who deserves a second chance?" Maria looked at Jonathan Sterling, this man who had fallen so far from grace, who had made terrible decisions that had hurt many people, but who had also shown her kindness and respect when so many others in his position would not have. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. I think everyone deserves a second chance, and I think Mr. Sterling will make the most of his." The trial concluded 2 days later with closing arguments. The prosecution maintained their position that Jonathan's crimes demanded serious punishment, regardless of his personal circumstances. The defense argued for leniency, pointing to his cooperation with authorities, his genuine remorse, and the testimony of witnesses like Maria who had seen his true character. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they finally returned, Jonathan Sterling was found guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud, as expected. But their recommendation for sentencing was far more lenient than what the prosecution had sought. Judge Harrison, a veteran federal judge known for his fairness, took an unusual step before announcing the sentence. He addressed Maria directly, acknowledging the impact of her testimony on the proceedings. "Miss," he said, "your testimony has reminded this court that behind every case are real human beings with complex motivations and circumstances. Your courage in speaking truth to power, regardless of personal risk, exemplifies the best of what citizenship can be." Judge Harrison sentenced Jonathan Sterling to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. It was significantly less than the 20-year sentence the prosecution had sought, and it included provisions for Jonathan to work with authorities to help recover and return the stolen funds. But perhaps more importantly, the judge ordered that the emergency fund Maria had discovered be used to establish the Scholarship Foundation, honoring Jonathan's biological father and providing educational opportunities for children of immigrant workers. As the courtroom cleared, Maria found herself surrounded by reporters asking for interviews. She politely declined, saying only that she hoped the Sterling family could now begin to heal and rebuild their lives. Jonathan Sterling was led away in handcuffs, but before he left, he managed to catch Maria's eye. The look that passed between them was one of profound gratitude and mutual respect. No words were necessary. 6 months later, Maria received a letter from Jonathan, written from federal prison in Northern California. He thanked her for her courage and told her that he was using his time in prison to teach financial literacy classes to other inmates. He was also working with authorities to develop new corporate oversight procedures that would prevent other executives from making the mistakes he had made. "You saved more than my reputation," he wrote. "You saved my soul. You reminded me of who I really am and who I want to be when I get out of here." Sterling had been forced to sell the Beverly Hills mansion, but she had found a modest home in a middle-class neighborhood where she was rebuilding her life. She had started a consulting business for nonprofit organizations, using the skills she had developed in her charitable work. Emma and Michael had transferred to public schools, where they were learning valuable lessons about resilience and humility. And Maria, she had indeed found a new position with another wealthy family, but this time the circumstances were different. Word of her testimony had spread through Beverly Hills' tight-knit community of domestic workers, and suddenly everyone wanted to hire the housekeeper who had shown such loyalty and integrity. Her new employer, tech entrepreneur Sarah, had specifically sought out Maria after hearing her story. "I want someone working in my house who has the courage to do the right thing," Sarah had said during the interview, "even when it's difficult." But Maria's real reward came in an unexpected form. The Scholarship Foundation had begun accepting applications, and Maria's own nephew, her brother Carlos's son, had been selected as one of the first recipients. The scholarship would pay for his education at UCLA, where he planned to study engineering. He had called to tell her the news. They said in the letter that this scholarship exists because someone had the courage to speak up for what's right. They said someone showed them that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they follow their conscience. As Maria hung up the phone, she thought about the words she had spoken in that federal courtroom. Good people sometimes do bad things when they're desperate or scared. That doesn't make the bad things okay, but it doesn't erase the good either. Jonathan Sterling would spend the next few years in prison, paying for his crimes. But he would also spend that time becoming a better person, guided by the example of a housekeeper who had shown him what real integrity looked like. In the end, Maria's decision to help had transformed more than just one family's fate. It had created ripples that would extend far into the future: scholarships for deserving students, better corporate oversight procedures, and a powerful reminder that justice is not just about punishment, but also about redemption and second chances. Sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes a billionaire's salvation comes not from expensive lawyers or powerful connections, but from the courage and compassion of someone who simply refuses to look away when others are in need. And sometimes when someone pleads, "Please help me, sir," the real question is not whether they deserve that help, but whether we have the courage to provide it walking in the garden, his ankle monitor glinting in the moonlight. Tomorrow, both of their lives would change forever. The question was whether Maria's faith in the power of truth and compassion would be enough to give this family a second chance.